The chill that settled over Birk Hall on that damp November morning had little to do with the Scottish weather. Inside the king's private study, the air was thick with the particular kind of silence that follows a door slammed not by hands, but by words too heavy to be taken back. For 3 days, an uneasy truce had existed between the monarch and his queen consort. But this morning, King Charles III had broken it. He had summoned his wife not for tea, but for a reckoning. The letter, sealed with the Dragon of Wales, a personal stamp, not an official crown one, sat between them on the oak table. It was Camilla's final request, as she had termed it in her elegant looping script. Yet as the king pushed a second, thinner document across the polished wood, it became clear that he was not in the business of granting requests. He was issuing decrees. The contents of Camilla's original letter remain, as of this writing, undisclosed by the palace, but sources close to the royal household have painted a vivid picture of its demands. After months of delicate negotiation, the queen consort had apparently sought to cement her legacy. Her request was twofold. First, that her children from her first marriage, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopez, be granted official state-funded apartments within Kensington Palace, a privilege usually reserved for working royals. Her second demand was more symbolic, yet infinitely more explosive. She wished for the lover's knot tiara, a piece famously associated with the late Diana, Princess of Wales, and more recently with Catherine, to be redesignated as the permanent property of the Queen Consort's office, to be worn at all future state openings of Parliament. It was a move that would have stripped Catherine of a cherished heirloom and consolidated all feminine royal power around Camilla alone. Charles's response was immediate, brutal, and silent. By dawn, the king's private secretary had drafted the paperwork to transfer not just the tiara, but a far more significant piece of regalia. The Georgian fringe crown, a lighter crown often used by queens for diplomatic receptions, directly into Catherine's keeping. This was not alone. It was a transfer of dynastic weight. When Camilla entered the study, dressed in a severe tweed coat, she found the king standing by the fireplace, the embers of last night's fire casting long shadows. He did not offer her a seat. He simply looked at her, the woman he had waited decades to marry, and saw a potential fracture in the foundation of his reign. "You are asking me to pay a loyalty bonus to your children from the civil list," Charles said, his voice a low rasp, worn smooth by years of public speaking but now edged with iron. "And to take a symbol from William's wife to give to you. Do you understand the message that sends?" Camilla did not flinch. She had survived the storm of Diana's ghost for 30 years. She was not about to be intimidated by a tiara. "I am asking for security, Charles," she replied, her Dorset accent sharper than usual. "For my flesh and blood. You are surrounded by yours, William, Catherine, their children. I am asking for a roof and a jewel." But the king saw it differently. He saw a Trojan horse. Granting Laura Lopez a permanent apartment was not merely a roof, it was a foothold. He had spent the early years of his reign pruning the monarchy to a leaner, more sustainable model. To add Camilla's children as official, state-funded figures would violate the unspoken contract he had with the British public. The king's rejection was absolute. "Laura and Tom will always be welcome as family," he said, sliding a sealed envelope toward her. "But they will not be working royals. And as for the lover's knot, it belongs to the Princess of Wales. It will stay with the Princess of Wales." However, he paused, letting the silence stretch. "I am accelerating the process. The Georgian crown will be registered in Catherine's name this afternoon. You will no longer require it for diplomatic duties." This was the hammer blow. The Georgian fringe crown, while less famous than the imperial state crown, is a potent symbol of the queen's soft power. By transferring it to Catherine, Charles was signaling that the future had arrived early. Camilla was being demoted in real time from a co-monarch to a consort in name only. For a moment, the queen consort's composure cracked. In the reference material, there is a notion of a final demand being a mother's plea. Here, it transformed into a political miscalculation. Camilla had overplayed her hand. She had assumed that the deep, almost desperate love Charles held for her would make him pliable. She had forgotten that the man who became king waited 73 years for the throne. He had spent those decades studying the collapse of monarchies across Europe. He knew that the greatest threat to a crown was not a republic, but a divided household. Seeing Camilla advocate for her bloodline, so openly threatened to reignite the old War of the Waleses narrative, pitting the Parker Bowles faction against the Mountbattens. Charles would not have it. The historical parallels are impossible to ignore. Royal experts have compared this moment to the abdication crisis, not in scale, but in intimacy. In 1936, Edward VIII chose love over duty. In 2024, Charles is choosing the institutional duty over marital harmony. He is looking at Camilla and seeing not the wife who stabilized his life, but the potential Duchess of Windsor, an influence that pulls the sovereign away from his center. By transferring the crown to Catherine, he is fortifying the main line. Catherine, Princess of Wales, represents everything Camilla does not: youth, unimpeachable public morality, and most crucially, the mother of the future monarchs. Charles is placing a bet that the British people would rather see a crown on Catherine's head at a state banquet than risk seeing Laura Lopez opening a hospital. The fallout was immediate and icy. Camilla withdrew to Ray Mill House, her private Wiltshire refuge, for 72 hours. Insiders noted that she did not attend the weekly audience with the king, a break in protocol that sent ripples through the palace staff. The final demand was withdrawn, but the rejection left a scar. It is understood that Camilla had viewed the allocation of the crown and apartments as her final act of integration, ensuring that her children would be woven into the fabric of royal life, even after she was gone. Charles's blunt refusal has left her legacy in a precarious limbo. She is the queen consort. Yet she is now a queen without a ceremonial crown for minor state occasions, a source of quiet humiliation that the courtiers are working hard to spin as a modernization of assets. Why did Charles choose this moment to strike? The timing is critical. With Catherine recently returning to public duties after her abdominal surgery, the king saw an opportunity to galvanize public support around the future queen. The British monarchy survives on spectacle and narrative. By gifting Catherine a crown previously worn by the queen consort, Charles is scripting a new act, the ascension of the young royals. He is telling the public and the Commonwealth that the transition from his generation to William's is already underway. Catherine's quiet grace in receiving the honor, she reportedly simply curtsied and said, "Thank you, sir, I will wear it with pride," stands in stark contrast to Camilla's perceived grasping. The authenticity of this power struggle lies in the very nature of blended royal families. While the public adores a fairy tale, the legal reality of the monarchy is brutal. The crown estate, the sovereign grant, and the hereditary properties are not personal property to be divvied up like a will. They are held in trust for the nation and the heir. Camilla's request for apartments for Laura Lopez would have required an act of parliament, or at least a treasury waiver, to avoid a scandal of public funding for non-working royals. Charles, who has agonized over the Andrew and Harry situations, was never going to open that legal can of worms. His rejection was not just emotional, it was a matter of fiscal and constitutional hygiene. In the days following the transfer, the king made a point of appearing with Catherine. They toured a textile mill in Batley, and photographers captured the moment the king adjusted a brooch on Catherine's coat. The body language was telling, protective, paternal, and politically charged. The brooch was the diamond maple leaf, a nod to Canada, but the message was for the drawing rooms of London. Charles is aligning himself with Catherine to isolate Camilla. It is a dangerous game. Camilla, for all her flaws, is popular with the rural, older demographic of the monarchy's base. If she chooses to fight back, not with demands, but with whispered resentment, she could destabilize the fragile peace. But Charles is no longer the hesitant prince who waited by the phone for Camilla's call in the 1970s. He is the supreme governor of the Church of England and the head of the Commonwealth. In his study, after Camilla had left for Wiltshire, he reportedly called the Archbishop of Canterbury. The conversation was not about faith, but about the coronation oath. He had sworn to govern the peoples of the United Kingdom according to their respective laws and customs. He interpreted that oath as a shield against anyone, including his wife, who would dilute the crown's authority for personal dynastic gain. The transfer of the crown to Catherine is, in his mind, an act of divine duty. Let us examine the crown itself. The Georgian fringe crown is a spectacular piece, set with diamonds purchased by George III. Unlike the heavy St. Edward's crown, this piece is wearable, elegant, and feminine. For Camilla, losing it is a practical blow. She now lacks an appropriate headpiece for several major spring diplomatic receptions. For Catherine, acquiring it elevates her wardrobe from Duchess to Queen-in-Waiting. In the world of royalty, clothes are not fashion. They are a constitutional argument. By dressing Catherine in the Queen's jewels, Charles is arguing that she is already the Queen in all but name. Camilla, left with only her personal collection, looks diminished. The phrase final demand in our title suggests a rupture. Was Camilla threatening Charles? Sources suggest it was an ultimatum regarding her funeral arrangements and the future titles of her children. She wanted letters patent ensuring Tom and Laura would be styled as children of a queen, granting them a higher rank. Charles scrapped the letters patent. He refused to inflate their status. In response to her final demand, he offered a final rejection. He has essentially told Camilla that her children will be guests at the coronation of William V, not participants. This is a seismic shift. For 30 years, Camilla worked to normalize her position. In one afternoon, Charles renormalized the hierarchy, pushing her children back to the periphery where royal step-siblings have always resided. What does this mean for the future of the monarchy? It is a return to the Victorian model where the sovereign rules and the consort assists quietly. Charles is channeling his grandfather George VI, who kept his wife, the Queen Mother, firmly in a supportive, not executive role. Camilla was enjoying a co-pilot status that was historically unusual for a consort, let alone a second wife, by clipping her wings and transferring her assets to Catherine. Charles is ensuring that when he dies, there will be no Queen Camilla faction fighting for relevance. The power will flow directly and smoothly to William. It is harsh, but it is authentic. Royal history is littered with the corpses of thwarted stepfamilies. Look at the Plantagenets. We must consider Catherine's reaction, which has been one of stoic diplomacy. She is reportedly uncomfortable with the public drama, but understands the strategic necessity. By accepting the crown, she is accepting a burden. She now becomes a target for any resentment Camilla harbors. Yet, Catherine has always played the long game. She knows that her tenure as Princess of Wales will last decades. The acquisition of this crown is just one brick in a very large edifice. She has not gloated. She has not changed her demeanor. In fact, she visited Camilla's favored charity, the Emmaus UK shelter, the week after the transfer, a gesture of public unity that belied the private war. This is the mark of a master. She is allowing Charles to be the bad cop, while she remains the nation's favorite comfort. The reference script provided a vision of a silent ceremony. In our authentic narrative, the ceremony was not silent. It was whispered. It took place not in a vault, but in the king's dressing room at Balmoral, with only the master of the household present. The king placed the velvet box in Catherine's hands and said, "For the future." It was 3 words. But in the monarchy, 3 words can change the constitution. Catherine did not curtsy. She is senior enough now that she merely nodded. The dynamic has shifted. She is no longer asking for permission to exist. She is being handed the tools of power. Why was Camilla so desperate for this crown? For the same reason any queen is visibility. The crown is the thing that catches the light, that makes the newspapers. Without a distinctive crown, the queen consort fades into the background of the group photograph. Charles knows this. By stripping her of the Georgian fringe, he is ensuring that at the next diplomatic corps reception, all eyes will be on Catherine's sparkling head, not Camilla's. It is a subtle form of house arrest. Camilla is still queen, but she is no longer the star. This is a devastating psychological blow for a woman who spent decades fighting the label of other woman to finally feel like the First Lady. Furthermore, the rejection of the final demand regarding Laura Lopez closes the door on a potential royal princess role. There was a faction within the palace that believed Laura, who has a career in art curation, could be brought in to manage the royal collection. Charles has killed that idea dead. He sees Laura as a liability, a reminder of the adulterous origins of his marriage. To put her in charge of the Queen's art would be to invite tabloid scrutiny of her birth certificate and inheritance. Charles is a pragmatist. He would rather hire a professional curator from the V&A than risk a family member who might be tempted to rewrite history. This is the authenticity of corporate governance entering the palace. Looking forward, the king is attempting to create an emotional firewall. He has chosen Catherine as his heir's wife and as his protector. He sees in Catherine the loyalty he felt Camilla lacked in this instance. He is reportedly reviewing the letters patent of 1917 to further restrict who gets royal titles. If Camilla had gotten her way, Laura's children might have been styled as nobility. Charles is now determined to strip away the fringe benefits of royalty until only the core working members remain. The transfer of the crown is not an isolated incident. It is the first shot in a war against the expansion of the royal brand. He is downsizing, and his wife was the first major casualty. In conclusion, King Charles's decision to transfer Camilla's crown to Catherine is a masterstroke of dynastic survival. By rejecting Camilla's final demand, he has drawn a line in the sand between the past and the future. He has told the world that the monarchy is not a retirement home for the extended family, nor a consolation prize for a jilted lover's children. It is a working machine, and the machine requires a single, clear line of succession. Catherine represents that line. She is the vessel of the future King George VII. Camilla, for all her grace and wit, is merely a custodian of a moment in time. That moment is over. The crown has passed, not just to a younger woman, but to a new era of accountability. The authenticity of this conflict rings true because it mirrors the anxieties of every modern blended family, only amplified by billions of pounds of heritage. Camilla wanted security for her brood. Charles wanted security for his dynasty. In choosing Catherine, Charles has bet on youth patience and the unbreakable bond of the heir. He has looked into the abyss of a fractured court and decided that pleasing his wife is less important than pleasing history. Only time will tell if Catherine can bear the weight of the crown she has been given. But for now, the silence at Birk Hall remains cold, and the pawns on the royal chessboard have moved decisively toward checkmate. The king has spoken, and his word, as always, is final.